It's already pressed. We'll do things. I get serious. That one on that class.
Are all of the sessions recorded or only some?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah. Wherever you see this little thing, it's, so I think they're all.
What is it?
Kevin can tell you more. It's a little, I don't know, rig that.
Is it live streaming it or what's it in?
No, it's just recording. I think it records onto this little USB stick based on what I'm seeing, and kind of splits the signal and does stuff. I don't know.
So it's recording your screen and then audio here?
Like it's got HDMI coming in, and then it's got HDMI out to the projector, and then I guess it's kind of intercepting. And then there's this little mic here, which is also hooked up. I don't know. They use this at a lot of camps, actually. Like this same kind of setup, yeah. I'm sure it evolves, but yeah. Hopefully I did it justice. Because they might listen to this. Because this is this is like, yeah. Alright, I think we can probably get started.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Do you mind just closing that door? Not that we're not a little bit. Just because it'll be a little noisy. Thank you. People might still try and get in. Alright, I guess we get started. Hope everyone had an awesome lunch. I think this is, it's not a bad time slot to be in because at least you're not like... Thanks. It's not a bad time slot to be in because, you know, at least you've eaten and you don't have hunger on the brain, but, you know, if you're getting a little dopey, I totally understand. Sometimes it happens. Food comas are, you know, their thing. So, I don't know, can anyone see the link at the back especially? Can you see it? Is that too far down? I can try and... Okay, I'll read it out as well, but you can also just go to the session on the website. I've added the link to the slides there. That might be easiest. It's bit.ly/txflorida17 if you want the slides. So yeah, we'll jump into it. If you're not here for the Drupal 8 theming experience, feel free to flee the room. I won't be offended. But thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Or me, I guess. Well, us. We're a group. Anyway, I'm Scott Reeves. You might also know me as Cottser, or that's kind of my handle. I am a Drupal 8 core committer and front-end framework manager, so I'm committing patches to Drupal 8 that are making the front end better in terms of, let's say, CSS and HTML and Twig and some of the kind of like PHP stuff that's backing that. By the way, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. I'm also the maintainer of the stable base theme in Drupal 8, which I'll actually be talking about. I'll be talking about stable in this presentation. And so far, it's been pretty easy being a stable-based theme maintainer. Mostly, it's just the job is basically telling people don't change it. It has to be stable. So that's pretty nice. I like that. I'm also, by day, I'm a team lead at Digital Kid now. We're a gold sponsor here. We're about 60-person Drupal shop out of London, Canada. And we're known as the Canadians with the hockey jerseys. I take it off when I present because it's a little hot, but yeah, if you ever see these around, that's us. And as you can see, I used to be a pilot as a child. I used to have a boss mustache. I wish I could still grow that mustache, but no, not so much. So let's just talk about some concepts before we jump into anything a little bit more practical. There will be some code and things like that, but it's also about the stories behind the code because this is all stuff that's happening in kind of new things for Drupal 8. So TX stands for Themer Experience, and we also have DX for Developer Experience. And on Drupal.org, we use these as tags to categorize issues, and there's all kinds of other tags. These are just a couple examples. of tags that we use to kind of categorize issues and try and prioritize and things like that. So themer is definitely a Drupalism. There's not really too many other systems that, like platforms, web platforms, that use the term themer. Especially in previous versions of Drupal, it's a hybrid role where you're kind of doing some back end in terms of like PHP, preprocess, all that kind of stuff. And then, sometimes you might be responsible for design, CSS, JavaScript, markup, right? It's a pretty wide umbrella theming. And again, PHP, which we have less of in Drupal 8, which is nice. And who knows what else, especially if you're in-house or something like that, you might be doing all of this and then some. So much respect to all the Drupal themers. You don't have an easy job. Give yourselves a round of applause, or just give Drupal themers a round of applause in general. So just converting things to Twig like we did in Drupal 8 doesn't necessarily solve all our problems. There's other parts of the theming experience that are painful and that we've tried to improve with Drupal 8. So I got involved with Drupal 8 core development like in early 2013, and I've just kind of kept going. So I helped get Twig itself into core, and then we kind of went on from that and made some of these other types of improvements. So, Twig is what initially got me excited. I was like, yeah, this is great. Twig's going to solve all our problems, then we can all just go home and put our feet up and it'll be great. But there's much more that we can do, and there's a lot of things that I think that were kind of a little bit confusing or overly complex that we were able to simplify. Like, for example, in Drupal 7 and I believe 6 as well, though I haven't done much Drupal 6, you had your pre-process for templates, and then you also had your process. In Drupal 8, we got rid of the process layer because that's not really needed, and it was just kind of confusing. I remember when I first got started, it was like, okay, I need to change this thing in this template. Do I use pre-process or do I use process? And of course the answer is it depends, but figuring out when to use what was definitely challenging. So what we're going to cover here, it's not going to be super exhaustive. There is documentation on these things on Drupal.org. You can look them all up pretty easily. And there's change records. If you haven't seen those, that kind of will go into some of these things in detail as well. So I'm going to be talking about core base themes, one of which is stable and the other is classy. I'm going to be talking about the Twig without filter. And then I'm going to be talking about the Twig theme registry loader, which is kind of a mouthful, but we'll make sense of it a little bit later. And we're also going to be talking about working with libraries in front end in Drupal 8. So the overall theme of this is going to be kind of how the system is designed and how you can learn to work with Drupal 8 for theming in front end rather than against it. That is my hope anyway for you coming out of this session. The D8 is definitely the biggest shift in terms of the front end stuff that's happening than any other version of Drupal, in my opinion. So if you keep working the same way that you've been working in Drupal 7 or older versions, you probably won't be happy. You'll probably just be kind of hitting the wall and just kind of trying to figure out why it doesn't work the same way. But in my opinion, these new ways of doing it open up new possibilities, and I'm going to try and show you some of those as we go. The other big theme of this is that individuals and small groups getting together around an idea can have a big impact, especially in a community like Drupal. So all the things that I'm going to be talking about here were added in Drupal 8 and driven by just people in the community who are passionate, some of which are actually at this camp. So if anything isn't making sense throughout, feel free to ask questions, or if I'm going too fast or too slow, I don't mind, let me know. Real-time feedback is great. And with that said, let's jump in. So for the base themes, you've got two main camps. What we basically analyze is that there's two main camps of people. So if you've ever heard of the consensus banana, this is the result of the consensus banana. If you haven't heard of the consensus banana, it just sounds like a silly thing. It is a silly thing. But there was an in-person discussion of about 20 people at DrupalCon Austin about this topic of kind of markup and theming in Drupal 8 and how do we kind of streamline things so that we make not only improve everyone's experience, but handle sort of different audiences. So we've got, and these names are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have too much thought behind them. This is just, we were just like, okay, we got, oh, well, it's doing this. Okay, I was in this room this morning. We didn't have this issue, I don't think, but that could be fun. So,
wiggle something in the back.
Wiggle something.
What the previous guy did, he stopped the recording, take the cable out of the computer,
God.
put it back, and you know.
Really?
Yeah.
I was hoping I wouldn't run into this because I have a. Is that going to be happy? Okay, that's not so bad. It kind of messed up the resolution though. Let's see. Bear with me here. Yeah, it really did. Sorry, folks. Okay, start. Okay, well, we might have to do that every 5 minutes, so I have to account for that in my timing a little bit. Okay, so we've got our sensible 2/3 and we've got our clean 1/3. So these proportions, there's no science behind this. It's probably not actually accurate, but they're basically personas that we came up with for people who use the Drupal theme system. My recommendation is that, so before I go on, let me get some more stuff on here. So we've got classy for the sensible 2/3 and stable for the clean 1/3. If you're in the stable crowd, we're not saying you're not sensible. It's just, those are just the words that we picked, so don't take offense, please. Most people should probably use classy. I mean, that's why we put them as the majority. If you're creating your own base theme, or if you just like to have more control over your markup and everything, you want to establish that more from the ground up, then you'll probably be happier with stable. You might be wondering why classy isn't the default, seeing as the majority of people, should we kind of recommend the majority of people use classy? Because how you get classy is in your themes info YAML file, you say base theme classy. How you get stable is do nothing. That's the default. So the answer for why classy isn't the default is that it's complicated. That's pretty much it.
The decision or the theme?
The decision. Because it just is complicated. I'm not going to get into it. There's no time. All right, so stable acts as a backwards compatibility layer. So we're actually still changing the templates and stuff in core itself, but stable kind of stays there so that when we change those templates, that to kind of try and at least keep them up to date with what's happening and clean them up. Stable is there to make sure that your site doesn't break when you upgrade to a newer version of Drupal. And having said that, things may still change slightly. You still have to check things when you upgrade to like a new major version. Say you're going from 8.2 of Drupal to 8.3 point something, then you should look over your site and make sure that it's not broken. But this is it's pretty stable. So it's basically a snapshot of markup from when Drupal 8 was released. And like I said, it allows us to continue to evolve the markup in core. Another thing, just so that you know it, is that classy inherits from stable. So there's some templates that, if you're working on things, you'll see that some templates will still be coming from stable. That just means they're not in classy, but that's kind of the chain of inheritance there. This is just like a kind of a little bonus thing. This is not really related that much, but this does kind of tie into that whole consensus banana and how we were able to split up these two themes. So in Drupal 8, classes for your markup are generally in the templates instead of in the pre-process layer buried in there. So if you're looking at a template, typically you'll have your big documentation block at the top, and then below that you'll have this thing that'll say set classes, and that's an array of classes where one is on each line. I'm not going to go too much into the details. It's Twig. Twig has its own documentation, which I think is quite good. So when you've got it in the template here, if you just don't want some of these classes, or if you want to add your own, it's as easy as either deleting this or changing them or adding your own line where you're putting my special awesome class, and then you can add some variables in there to make it dynamic. all that kind of fun stuff. There's also this attributes thing. So when we're printing this article tag, we're also printing attributes. And attributes is cool because you can manipulate it sort of as you're printing it. So you can, what we're doing here is we're adding the classes that are defined up at the top. And you can also remove classes, set attributes, all that kind of stuff. The syntax is almost, some of it is pretty similar to jQuery actually. So it may already feel familiar to you once you start using it. And you can also attach libraries. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And if you want to kind of learn more about the stuff that you can do in the Twig templates, I'm not going to be covering that a lot. But one suggestion I can make is to seek out any of Morten DK's talks. That's MORTENDK, also known as Div Killer. He swears sometimes, so if you're sensitive to that, you can find someone else.
Sometimes.
Yeah, often I should say. But it's pretty entertaining. You know, some people call it the Morten Show, so it's good stuff. If you ever get a chance to go to DrupalCon or something, he's a pretty lively presenter. All right. So let's dive into another concept here in talking about these base themes. So the concept here is additive versus subtractive. So if you're in that group that I talked about, the clean 1/3 that wants extra control, maybe wants cleaner markup, it's really kind of a problem, and it's error prone. If your goal is to have less classes and less markup, and they're just giving it all to you, and you have to strip it away using pre-process and who knows what, like you probably have to use regular expressions at a certain point to rip that stuff out. So it's just getting pretty nasty to do what you actually want to get the output that you want. So the idea of giving you less and then letting you add on top definitely applies to how we kind of restructured a lot of the templates and things in Drupal 8. And these concepts also apply to how we integrated Twig itself, the Twig library, into Drupal 8. We didn't want to change Twig too much, especially for people. There's already kind of a Twig ecosystem, and people who know Twig, whether it's because they've used a Symfony framework or something like that. So we didn't want to have like our own Drupal brand of Twig, because that kind of defeats part of the purpose of kind of getting into that ecosystem. So we added some filters and functions because Drupal is special and you need special Drupal-y things, and that's fine. But other than that, we didn't change too much. And if you've already worked with Twig and you haven't yet worked with Drupal 8, hopefully you should feel pretty at home with how we've implemented it in D8. So you might remember if you've worked with Drupal 7 theming, and I guess maybe can I get hands? How many people have themed with Drupal 7? So a lot of you, okay. I'm not going to apologize because I'm not responsible for that. But you might remember, well, or you might be experiencing this right now, because I'm still building D7 sites, but in D7 templates, you can use the show and hide functions. In my opinion, these are confusing as hell. Behind the scenes, if you've never looked at it, what they're actually doing is you've got a render array, which I'm not going to try and explain because they've been called undocumentable, and I tend to agree with that. But anyway, you've got this array, and it's got a key on it that's called hash printed. Well, the key might not be there, actually, because it's an array. But anyway, when you're doing show and hide, it's manipulating that hash printed, and it's basically saying printed is either true or false. So when you show, it says printed false, and then when you go to print it, it prints it and then sets printed to true. It's keeping track of the state of everything that you're printing on the page, and then you're showing and hiding. The whole concept of show and hide was also a pain in the ass to implement in Twig, pardon my language, because Twig doesn't modify things by reference like that. It just doesn't, so we had to come up with our own like wrapper object, and it made things slow, and it made things hard to debug. And so we got some inspiration for how to solve this option of printing the things that you want and breaking things apart. We got the inspiration from another content management system that was using Twig called Craft. And I can't can't remember if it's actually open source. It is paid. You have to pay for it. But anyway, they're using Twig as well. I think it's PHP and Twig. Yeah, it is PHP. Because anyway, so I'll show you some code examples here. So and can people see that at the back? Okay. All right. If not, the slides are online. Apologize. So the top one here, which ends about here, is kind of how you would do it in Drupal 7. So this first code example doesn't actually work in Drupal 8. You'll get a whole bunch of errors because show and hide don't exist, thank God. So in an older presentation, we actually had this as PHP template, the top one, but I just can't stand to look at it anymore, so we kind of made a fake Twig version of it. So anyway. So what we're doing is we're hiding the comments and the links, then we're printing everything but the comments and the links, and then we're printing the links. And then what we want to do again is, this is just a made-up example, so it's probably not practical. But anyway, then we want to print the content with the links but without the comments. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code to do that. And the D8 version is we have the without filter. And it kind of, to me, reads just like a sentence. So you say, I want all the content without the comments and the links. And then you say, okay, give me the content links, so content.links. And then you say, okay, give me all the content again, but without the comments. So the key thing here is that it's no longer tracking whether you've printed this stuff or not. So it's up to you to decide what you want to print where. So if you're in like a node template or something and you want to split up your fields into different divs or something.
So this will display twice the content?
Yeah, again, this is just an example, but it will, yeah.
It will,
Yeah, so in D7, it would, these would do the exact same thing if the first one worked. But that's kind of the D7 version. But yeah, you would print the content twice. So basically, you can print anything as many times as you want. You don't need to show it again or worry about anything like that. And you've got kind of the ability with Twig to just use dot to kind of drill down a little bit. And there's some limitations there, but for something like a node template, it works pretty well overall. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
You said we can use a dot?
Yeah, so that's, I won't go into debugging, but yeah, if you were able to, basically you would probably be debugging and you would look and see that inside of content you've got links, and then you can just kind of access that using a dot instead of, so the key thing is that with Twig, you don't have to worry about whether it's an array or whether it's an object, or you can just kind of drill down into it regardless, as long as you kind of know what you're trying to get at. So,
with the links and the Cottser, are those is that like a nested render array?
Yes.
Thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So content, that would be like in a node template. So content contains, it's just an array that has all your different elements, like your links and your comments, and then all your other fields that you've got on the node and things like that. So yeah, it's a render array. Yeah, good question. All right, oops. Oh, that's fine. All right, so let's talk about the Twig registry loader and figure out what those words mean. So before this change was made in D8, there were two ways to reference a Twig template from your template. And I'll explain in a second why you would want to reference other templates. But for now, let's just say that by namespace, it just basically maps to a directory. So the templates directory in this case of the stable theme. So it says like @stable/block/block.html.twig. And then the second way is to manually put in the full path from the Drupal root. I'm not going to read all that out, but yeah, so at one time, we actually only had the second option. The namespace option was added a bit later. So if you only had the second option and you decided you want to, let's say, move your theme into a subfolder or do something like that, you probably have to adjust a lot of the paths in your templates because they're all basically hard-coded. So now I'm going to tell you about why you would want to reference Twig templates from other templates. So Twig has its own concept of blocks. We call them twig blocks so that we don't confuse them with Drupal blocks, so I recommend you do the same with your colleagues and so on. Otherwise, it's just going to get real confusing. We thought about kind of renaming the twig blocks. I'll just show you some code here. So you've got block content at the bottom and then end block. So we thought about maybe we should rename that and call it twig block, all one word or something. But again, we didn't want to change Twig too much. We didn't want to make it weird for people coming in that already knew Twig. So we just kept them the same. We didn't want to try and change the word blocks in Drupal. That would have been a very uphill battle, to say the least. So we didn't do that. So yeah, here's the little block. Oh, my highlight's a little bit off, but hopefully you can see that okay. That's the block part there. So that's kind of, you're setting that up so that it can be extended. So I'll kind of show you a little bit more of an example. I'm not sure if you can see that at the back because the screen is a little bit low. But what we're doing is we're extending this so at the bottom that would be a second template. So you're extending the block template, and then you basically have that same block tag, but this time you put whatever you want to override essentially in that block. So you can have a more specific block template, like let's say a block for your search box or something like that, and then you could do something a little bit different in there. I think that's the example I've got here. So if for some reason you need an extra wrapper in your search form block, you could do something like this. This parent function is kind of a cool little Twig helper, which just prints whatever would be already in that block from the parent template that you're extending, because you're kind of creating a child template by extending the other block template. So this is just at the top, it's basically showing the structure of your theme, where you would have your info.yaml file, and then you'd have your templates directory. You can still organize things how you would like in your templates directory, but within there you could have this specific block template. Does that make sense?
So the parent, in this case, would just show content from the parent?
That's right, yeah. So if I jump back a second, oops. Yeah, so it would just print this content variable. And but in our case, it would be adding a wrapper around it using that parent functionality. So that way it's actually kind of even more, or I should say even less copy and pasting. So if you decide to change that parent template, then you don't have to worry as much. So, and then let's say you start to add more templates. So in our previous example, we didn't actually have a generic block template in our theme, so that was still coming from either stable or classy or whatever base theme you might be using. But at a certain point, maybe you decide you need the same markup on all your blocks for whatever reason. Your search form block is still referencing, in our case, stable. You might have intended to do that, but you may also forget about it if you're doing it weeks or months or days later. And so now things are kind of almost out of sync. So you might wonder, why aren't my changes from my main block template showing up in my search form template? And that's because they're extending stable. They're not extending your theme's block template. So yeah, and so I've just highlighted the extends there. So that's kind of a part there where we're referencing stable. So we're basically going to like the grandparent template when we probably need to go just to the parent template. And from my perspective, at the time I was a theme system maintainer, and this almost came in as a feature request in terms of like, can we make this better? And it was actually, a lot of it was driven by Mark Drummond, who is here at this camp. I think he's just in one of the rooms over there. So I was like, we already gave you that namespace thing where you could do @stable. Like, we used to have to specify the whole path. Like, in my day, you had to walk uphill both ways, So Mark's suggestion was, what if we didn't have to specify anything? What if we could just say, hey, I'm extending the block template, and like you figured out what I mean. So, and there was lots of other things on the go. We weren't even sure, like, the deadlines were shifting. We weren't sure, like, when Drupal 8 was coming out, because no one really knew. And at the time that we were talking about this, we didn't know that it would be another like 1.5 years before D8 would come out, right? So we're like, oh, do we have time to add this basically new feature? So we did. We did it, thanks to people like Mark who drove that change, and I worked on some code for this one myself. And so with the new method, you do what Mark suggested. You say, hey, I want to extend block.html.twig, and for the most part, we figure it out for you. It uses the Drupal theme registry. So the Drupal theme registry keeps track of all your template overrides. It keeps track of your preprocess functions. That's mostly what it does, and it figures out basically which template is active. So when it comes time to rendering this search form block, it's going to look in the registry and say, okay, they've got a template override, use that. And in this case, it can also look up, okay, they want to extend a block template, figure out what is the active block template. So in our case, it's the one that we've got in our theme. It's not stable. It's, it's right there. So it's this is kind of a good way to mix the fanciness of Twig, where you can extend things, plus, just 1 second, plus the kind of the way that Drupal allows you to do these specific template overrides and things like that. So you're kind of mixing both the ability to extend with the ability to be specific. I think you had a question?
So if we are editing a Twig template, we make any alterations to what's being extended, we then have to rebuild the theming registry?
Not if you change what's being extended. Where you would need to either flush your caches or specifically flush... actually, I don't know if you can specifically do that in D8 anymore, but with Twig, if you're updating a Twig template, you don't need to clear any cache. Well, at least if you're using the kind of the development settings, which maybe I can show people later in the Genius bar if we have time at the end of the talk, how to set that up. But yeah, like if you're adding a new template override, so if we were adding this search form block to our theme, that's when you would need to clear the cache to get the theme registry to pick up the new template, because it is kind of caching that and saving that so that it doesn't have to figure that out for every page load. Okay, does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. All right. So these are kind of now the 3 ways in Drupal 8 that you can reference another template, whether you're extending or including. I'm only talking about extending, but there's other ways that you can kind of fit things together. So whenever possible, I would recommend the first method by just giving the template name. There's some cases currently where the first method won't work, and unfortunately you'll actually get an infinite loop, so just be aware of that. It's pretty rare that it'll happen. Yeah, it's basically if you wanted to extend Core's block template with your own block template. So it's essentially when they have the exact same name that you can run into problems. But that should be solved at some point in the future. Some folks are working on that, so hopefully that will be a thing of the past soon. But just something to be aware of. If you're just getting like a white screen of death or something, just check your extending, because there's sometimes right now where you have to use that second method where you actually say, at stable, at classy, at whatever your base theme is, to avoid that situation where it's basically trying to load itself. Yeah, because at the time we weren't able to figure out how to prevent that, so we said, okay, we'll go with this because it's better than nothing. So yeah, just be aware of that. And this is just a comment post on Drupal.org from Eatings. His name is David Huang, and awesome community member, bad camp organizer, all that good stuff. And so after this code to make that first option available was committed, people were like tweeting about it and being like, ooh. And David said, like, basically the way I would sum up his post, not that it's a long post, is like, I thought it would always work like this. Like, this is great. Like, this is how I assumed the system would work. So that, to me, that tells us that we're doing something right. It's kind of validation. So if you ever see something, like if you're someone that actually does follow what's happening in the development, like, don't be afraid to post comments in this like this. I just have to say that because when we're working on core development, there's a lot of hypotheticals. It's kind of like you're trying to imagine, okay, how is this person going to use this, and how is this other person going to use this? Kind of goes back to the personas I was talking about earlier. So to have a real person actually come in and say, like, this works how I would expect it to work, it was awesome, especially after you put in all the work. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So you can also, when you're extending, there's kind of a little trick where you can extend variables. So this is one last thing before we move on to the topic of libraries. So even if the Twig template doesn't have a Twig block declared, you can actually still manipulate the variables from it. So one thing, for example, is you could manipulate the attributes that are being printed around a certain wrapper or something like that. So this can get a bit tricky because, and the little asterisk here links to an issue that kind of explains more in depth. And if anyone wants to talk about it later, I'm going to try not to go too much into it now, but when you're manipulating variables like this, any kind of dynamic behavior that's happening in the parent template actually happens after. So if you've got the parent template, let's say declaring a class of arrays like we saw earlier, when you're in this child template, you don't have access to that yet. You kind of only have access to whatever is coming into the parent template. So basically there's an order of operations there where child template actually goes before parent in this case, because it's essentially, this is kind of what's being printed. So hopefully that made some amount of sense, and we can talk about it later more if you would like. But the takeaway is that you can do something like extend the block template, and then all you do is add these set tags. So that's how you manipulate the variables in Twig. So you would say set title attributes equals title attributes dot add class hello there, and then that would add that class onto the title attributes that are being printed from the block template. So, and then you can remove classes. Anything that you could do with variables, you can do in there. So sometimes that's a good way of preventing you from doing kind of copy and pasting and stuff like that. Kind of an alternative to pre-process as well. So libraries are another big thing in Drupal 8. Arguably along the same scale as something like Twig is in terms of like the changes in the front end. It's pretty different from how things are done in D7. The asterisk here just links to some documentation about libraries, and that's actually where I pulled some of these code samples. If you're wondering why I've got a cuddly slider here, I don't know who came up with that, but I thought it was pretty cuddly. So this kind of started as an evolution of hook library in Drupal 7, which personally I didn't actually work with that much, but I guess it was a thing in Drupal 7. It handles dependencies and things like that. So one thing I always like to mention, especially if you haven't worked with D8 yet on the front end, is that in D8, anonymous users don't get a whole load of JavaScript like they do in D7. So by default, if you just set up a D8 site and you start to theme on it, unless you're using like maybe a base theme that's changing things, you won't get jQuery unless you add a library that has a dependency on the jQuery library. So if you're like logged in and your slider works, and then you log out and your slider doesn't work, just check that, because you're probably missing a dependency.
This is my ignorance of how to write libraries. I see that everything makes sense. JS : and then the JavaScript file.
Yeah.
CSS, but there is no CSS file. There is that theme level stuck in between. What does that signify?
Yeah, I don't think I have time to go too much into that. But basically, with the theme, with the CSS, you've got kind of different layers. So you've got it's based on the SMAX standard for writing CSS. I don't know off the top of my head actually what all the names are, but you've got, I think, theme, component, I think module is one of them. And it's kind of a way of grouping things, and it's also the order that they're loaded in. So it's just kind of and that's sort of optional, but that's sort of the recommended way to do CSS in Drupal 8. So that's what that kind of little middle layer there is for the CSS. But if you're just writing your own theme and you want to do it however, you can you can put everything in theme, and that's fine too.
Okay.
But that kind of little middle layer there is required. So you do need to specify something there. So yeah, we talked about the jQuery thing. But basically in D8, libraries are everywhere. It's kind of the only actively supported way of adding CSS and JavaScript to whether you're doing a module or you're doing a theme. That's kind of how you load your front-end assets, is using this libraries API. And the libraries are namespaced as well, so your library names and your file names and things like that don't need to be unique anymore. So you can kind of shorten up some of your file names potentially. And the namespacing thing, the lack of namespacing in D7 is actually why the FOAD technique, made famous by Morton, I guess, worked in previous versions of Drupal. So the FOAD technique is in your info file in D7, if you want to remove like node.theme.css or something like that, you don't put any files in your theme, but you say, hey, like add node.theme.css to my theme, and it essentially removes that file because it overwrites it with nothing. It's a weird thing, but it's a hack. But
what does the FOAD stand for?
Inappropriate?
It's inappropriate. I'm not Morton. I don't curse like Morton.
What
But
about OAD at least?
Even that's pretty inappropriate.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it's
F off and stop living.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, well said. All right. So one of the things that we have with libraries as well is overrides. So this is kind of the new version of the FOAD technique. And yeah, so we don't have to call it that anymore. It's just overrides because there's actually an API for it now. So the overrides are something that kind of a small handful of people dreamt up, and essentially one person wrote all the code for this, which is amazing. So if we didn't have this functionality, you'd have to write, every time you wanted to do this in your theme, you could do it. There was an API here, but you'd be writing a lot of PHP in your theme to do this rather than a few lines in your YAML, in your info YAML of your theme. So it's kind of nice. We're writing less PHP when we're writing our themes. It's nice. We also have style sheets remove and style sheets override in D8, but they're deprecated. I personally wouldn't recommend using them unless you've got a good reason. D8 is all about libraries. Libraries are everywhere, so I say just use libraries override. Be careful about removing JavaScript. It's kind of like I was mentioning earlier about the jQuery dependency. Like things may break if you remove JavaScript, and so with overrides you can replace one file with another file. Or you can just say false, and that will make it D. That will make it go away. So that's pretty much it. I can show you, if we've got time at the end, I'll show you kind of my technique for, because I know it looks kind of nested, but I'll show you my technique for kind of, it's just basically a copy and paste, but I'll show you how to kind of do these somewhat efficiently, so you don't have to type this all out and tab and enter, and anyway. So one of the upsides of libraries override is you can basically do jQuery update in like 3 lines in your info YAML file. And this is something that I think none of us realized when we were thinking about this feature, but is really cool because this is actually a practical use of this feature that, you know, jQuery is going to keep updating itself, and you probably want a newer version at some point. So when we're running jQuery 5000 max, you can slam this into your info file and you'll be good to go. Yeah, it's the biggest jQuery ever. The code is maximized, not minified. So yeah, hopefully we have some very fast internet in the year 3000. All right. Another practical use is Modernizr. I don't know how many people use Modernizr, but I like using Modernizr for a lot of things. And so if you've got a custom Modernizr build with your own detections of features, whatever you want to detect that the browser can or can't do, you can add in your own custom Modernizr builds, again, using a few lines in your info file. The thing I would want to add here is, remember when we were talking earlier about additive and subtractive, remember to be additive because core itself needs Modernizr for certain things. So basically start from their Modernizr build and add your stuff, don't take away stuff, otherwise stuff's going to break. So yeah, just be aware of that. So not only do we have overriding, but we also have extending, which is, it's kind of like a reverse dependency. Basically what you're doing is you're having a library from your theme load when another module or theme's library is loaded. So it's good for kind of conditionally loading because there's certain modules like the node module that will only load CSS when they need to. So maybe you want to kind of hook onto that so that you're loading less files. Maybe, I don't know, it depends on the use case. So what you can do is you can do libraries extend, and let's say you want to extend the Drupal user library from the user module in core. You just specify kind of the namespace name of the library. So in this case, our theme is called my_theme, and then we have our own library called user. So whenever that user/Drupal.user library is loaded, it'll also load our library. And that, to be clear, that only applies when your theme is active. So if you're using a different backend theme like 7, it's not going to load it in that case. It's only going to load it when your theme is active. So just be aware of that.
That would be true even of other overrides and everything else, right? I mean,
yeah, of everything. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's not just. That's a good point. It's not just extending. If you want to override something from 7, then yeah, you can't really do it that way. So this is just a tweet that I did. I guess about a couple years ago, or I guess a little bit less than that. This is the person that basically did both of these features almost single-handedly, and his name is Anibiet Udo, and hopefully I'm not butchering that too badly. I've tried to practice it, but anyway. So yeah, actually we can give him a quick round of applause. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Take a picture and I'll tweet it to him.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Hey, give him a thumbs up.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. All right, that was so awesome. So here's kind of a little bonus thing. I touched on this earlier that we would talk about this. So if you're working in the whatever.html.twig template and you want to add a cuddly slider to whenever that twig template is loaded, you can call this function from Twig called attach library, and then you just give it the namespace name of the library, and then whenever your twig template is rendered, essentially, that library will be loaded. So if you've got something very specific where you know you're only going to need this slider script or whatever, you can really break it down and make it fairly modular this way, which I think is pretty nice. So this slide was more controversial because the very first time that I gave this talk, D8 actually was just about to come out, and so people are like, "Oh yeah, Drupal 8's done." And I was like, "No, it's not. It's not done." So, because I kind of touched on this earlier, like there's that feature of extending the templates. It can be approved, so there's always room for more. Drupal 8.3 is kind of on the horizon, coming fairly soon. And so there's room for new features for Drupal 8.4 and beyond. Ideas welcome. A lot of these, we got the idea from someone, and then the person with the idea doesn't necessarily need to implement it. So if you're let's say working on a D8 site and you're theming and you find something that's like, man, it'd be great if it did this. You can always post it in the issue queue, find someone like me, tweet at people, do whatever you need to do to get your idea out there, because we're all in this together. At the end of the day, we're all using Drupal, so we all can have ways of making it better even if we're not coding, and that's amazing. I myself am not actually doing that much coding anymore. I'm mostly reviewing other people's code. So anyway, all the ideas that we talked about today were basically, they came from just these ideas that people had, or a small handful of people. So yeah, thank you. So I do have time to show a few things. I'm kind of under time, so if you want to stick around, I can demo a few things. If not, you can totally leave, that's fine. I'm also going to hop over to the Genius Bar area for the kind of half an hour in between sessions if you want to chat there. I think it's from 2 to 2:30 if I'm not mistaken. So there's that too. But yeah, I'm going to show you, I'll show you at least how to do kind of the library stuff a little bit more. Oh, actually, no, I guess I'm slightly over time. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the Genius Bar and we'll do stuff there. I didn't realize that. I guess I started a bit later.
So do you live in Canada?
Yeah. It's kind of between Toronto and Detroit. Sort of up, so it's kind of like...
Are you Canadian, or did you move there for their
I'm Canadian.
You're Canadian?
Yeah. I'm from like further up north in Canada.
It's even colder.
Yeah.
I'm actually from Illinois, and it's like cold enough for me.
Excellent. Could do it. Yeah, Illinois is cold. I think there's a lot of places up in there that get surprisingly. Well, I mean, they're still pretty far north, so
I've only visited Canada once. I really liked it, but I just remember we actually went in the fall or the winter. It was October.